Welcome everybody to the Kimberlite webinar to take a comprehensive look at the artificial lift and production chemicals market. My name is David Batt, President of Kimberlite Research, and I'm glad that you're able to join us today. This is the 22nd in the Kimberlite webinar series that we've hosted on behalf of the oil and gas operators around the world who have participated in our industry research. Our past webinars have included reviews of many of the oil field products and services most commonly used in the industry, such as directional drilling services, formation evaluation services, cementing services, surface wellhead, subsea, pipeline integrity, and others. And even most recently, we took a comprehensive look at the big three oil field service suppliers in the Permian Basin across many different sectors. And just last month, we took a comprehensive look at the hydraulic fracturing services market. Let us know if you or your colleagues need access to any of these webinars or any of these report summaries that we produce and send to the oil and gas operators as a professional courtesy and a thank you for your participation in our research. If you have any questions about the webinar today during the course of the webinar, just send us a chat message and we'll try to address your questions as we go. Today, I'll be taking a deep dive into the artificial lift and production chemical market, looking at supplier performance and trends. Feel free to submit questions in the chat box. For those of you that are not that familiar with Kimberlite Research, I'll provide a brief background and then dive right on in. Each year at Kimberlite Research, we interview about 3,000 users of oilfield services globally. About half of our research is international and half is North America. From these 3,000 one-on-one phone interviews that we conduct, in which many of you may be on the call today, may have participated in our past research, and we thank you for that. And if you would like to participate in our future research, please reach out to us. We produce a series of reports talking to geologists and geophysicists, drill engineers, completion, production, and subsea. As we mentioned today, we'll be covering research that we interviewed in July, August, September of this year with production engineers and managers regarding the use of artificial lift systems and production chemicals. The performance trends that I'll be sharing with you today from 2016 through 2022 are based on over 4,000 interviews with production engineers and managers, and including over 100,000 performance ratings on the suppliers. The data set is rich and multidimensional. In this exhibit, we cross-plot supplier performance on the x-axis versus pricing strategy or pricing competitiveness on the y-axis. This is the value map in an exhibit we'll be using quite a bit today, so I'd like to explain this before we dive in. This is a visual picture depicting the competitive landscape. The top right-hand quadrant is the premium offering quadrant, where suppliers cost more than industry norm, but they're worth it because they deliver better than industry average performance and results. The bottom right-hand quadrant is value advantage. Suppliers in this quadrant are viewed as performing better than industry average and positioned to gain share. The bottom left is the discount quadrant. Suppliers perform below industry average but have attractive pricing, so you basically fall within the fair value fairway and you get what you pay for. So as an oil company, you can pay more to get more, you can pay less to get less. In the top left-hand quadrant, any suppliers plotting in the top left-hand quadrant are competitively disadvantaged with respect to overall performance versus price or value, if you will. And suppliers in this top left-hand quadrant are positioned to lose market share unless a recovery plan is implemented. Again, all of the research that I'm getting ready to share with you today is based on customer reviews. And with that, we'll dive in. One of the first things I want to discuss with you is the overall market trend. If you take a look at the oil and gas operators globally, 73% of the oil and gas operators report that they plan to increase their artificial lift expenditures over the next 12 months. Only 24% are planning to keep expenditures level, unchanged, and very few oil and gas operators are expecting to decrease artificial lift expenditures over the next 12 months. If you take a look at the sentiment indices, you can see that we've been in expansion mode prior to going into COVID, in which we hit contraction, and now we're back into growth mode. When you take a look at the drilling projections for 2023 across the globe, you'll see that operators are projecting to drill 17% more wells in United States land in 23 versus 22. And we also see projected double-digit growth international and offshore. In my 30-plus year career in the oil and gas industry, it's very uncommon to see a globally coordinated uplift cycle where both international, offshore, and North America are all pointing in the same direction in double digits. This will continue to place great strains on materials, supply chains, and labor. Keep in mind, in 2022, for United States land, we began the year thinking we're going to drill about 20% more wells. Due to the elevated oil pricing and the war in Ukraine, we're actually on pace to drill approximately 40% more wells in 2022 versus 21. So there has definitely been a market response by the operators and a call for barrels, and so it's a good testament to the market signals. When we move towards automation and digital type topics, what we find is that the North America land operators are really kind of leading the pack, with 72% of the wells of the sample that we surveyed and talked to are using some form of automation, a little bit less so internationally and offshore. The number one desired improvement areas for automation revolve around improved algorithms for predictive analysis and improved software updates, followed with improved communications and access to real-time data. So we thank the operators for providing their feedback for where they'd like to see the service suppliers improve their automation. Certainly companies like ChampionX with XBOC and Weatherford with Foresight and Signet and even Lufkin with their pump off controller and well manager. This type of feedback is what's needed by the oil field service suppliers to make sure they're investing their resources in the correct areas. When you look at downhole pressure temperature gauges for gas lift installations, you notice that the U.S. land operators are only projecting to basically use downhole gauges for about 1 in 4 of the wells. And that tends to translate to the fact that, there's 4 wells per pad typically. And so the oil and gas operators are judiciously using their funds for digital to where maybe they'll use 1 well on a pad as a proxy. They do like to bundle together about 2/3 of the time their installation of their gas lift systems, the valves, mandrels, and packers, along with the downhole gauges and cap strings and spooling. So you'll find that many of the gas lift suppliers in U.S. land offer an integrated approach, be it Flowco or Priority or ChampionX. You'll find that many of the gas lift suppliers out there are capable to bundle all this and integrate it together for ease and convenience of the oil and gas operator. Chemical injection pumps are used on about half of the wells globally, 56% U.S., but only 1 in 4 of the U.S. land operators have remote visibility and control. So we see this continuing to grow as U.S. land operators would like to be able to not only control chemical injection remotely into their wells to improve flow assurance, but also to monitor tank levels. Keep in mind that the use of solar pumps tend to be most highly used in North America, U.S. land, and Canada, whereas electric and pneumatic are used elsewhere internationally and offshore. Also keep in mind that only about 12% of the wells in U.S. land are running cap strings for the chemical injection today. So there's certainly opportunities to improve chemical injection and dosage rates and remote monitoring, and to use cap strings to deliver the chemicals more precisely in the wellbore where it's needed. When you look at ESG just really quick, we find that about 2/3 of the oil and gas operators are planning to increase their ESG expenditures in the next 12 months, and the other 1/3 hold flat. Most of the ESG focus, though, is around reduction of emissions and emissions monitoring. So companies like ChampionX with Scientific Aviation in the United States land market are well positioned to kind of help play a role in that, and there are many other companies that are moving into emissions monitoring as well. Carbon capture tends to fall in second place. So a lot of the oil and gas operators are investing in carbon capture. With the Inflation Reduction Act, of course, the 45Q tax credits were increased significantly, making it, there's a clear economic model for oil and gas operators to make money by putting CO2 on the ground, either permanently or for enhanced oil recovery. When you take a look at the United States land market, it's changed dramatically in the last 7-8 years. It used to be you drill a well, put it on a rod pump, and walk away. But today, when you drill a well in U.S. land unconventional, you typically will put it on gas lift, ESP, or perhaps jet pump or or something like that, and eventually migrate to a rod lift system over time. So there's now multiple forms of lift that are being used in United States land. Progressing cavity pumps are heavily used in the heavy oil belt of Canada and some select international markets. So when you take a look at the installed base of wells in United States land, you'll find that about half the wells are rod lift. Used to be back in 2010, it would have been 70–80% of the wells rod lift. But now, because of these introduction of other forms of lift, operators are becoming very keen in being able to select optimal lift type for optimal well performance. Progressing cavity pumps more heavily used in Canada. Offshore is ESP and gas lift, and when you move international land, you'll see that ESPs play a significant role, followed by rod lift and gas lift. But what's important to keep in mind is in the United States land market, when you drill a well, particularly if we focus in on the Permian Basin, 89% of the operators that we interview will use multiple lift type systems. And ESPs have been winning out over gas lift due to the elevated oil prices. Operators believe that with an ESP, you can get higher oil production than you can with gas lift. So the use of ESP as that first form of lift has been increasing in the last 2 years due to the elevated oil prices. Not to mention that there's some pretty good commercial leasing programs that are out there for ESPs that make it attractive. By the time that an oil and gas operator moves an unconventional well to rod lift, it can be as long as 5 or 7 years down into the future, because it's not uncommon for an operator to keep using ESPs for as long as 2 years on average today, up from just 6 to 9 months a few years ago. And gas lift is not uncommon for oil and gas operators to use gas lift for an average residence time of about 4 years. So the dynamics of the U.S. land market have changed quite significantly. If we start to take a look at artificial lift demand, what we find is in 2020 during COVID, we saw a decline in gas lift and ESP as the number of wells that were drilled declined. And since gas lift and ESP are the first forms of lift to be used, but you see rod lift installations continuing to climb every year. And these are principally conversions from wells that were drilled in prior years that are finally reaching bottom hole temperatures in production volumes that are optimal to be converted to a rod lift system. Also keep in mind, you see the strong growth in ESPs growing faster than gas lift. That's due to the elevated oil pricing, as operators want to try to produce as many barrels as they can given the call for barrels and the elevated pricing. This has really resulted due to the increased drilling of 40% in 2022 versus 21 that we spoke about previously. And you can see that the size of the ESP market has grown over $600 million from about $1.7 billion in 21 to about $2.3 billion in 2022. And you can also see that the Permian Basin is the principal basin where the majority of the artificial lift market is, and that's why you see so many companies, be it Valiant ESP or Champion X ESP, focus a lot of their very finite resources into key basins where the activity levels are the greatest and the demand and the needs are the highest. Let me see here. Some other trends I'd like to touch on before we go into supplier performance is the use of used sucker rods or inspected or remanufactured sucker rods continues to grow and actually comprises a pretty significant share of the market. Used sucker rods make up about half the market in the Mid-Con and slightly below half of the market in the Eagle Ford and Permian. In fact, if you take a look back in the Permian Basin from 19 to 22, used sucker rods have grown from 23% up to 41, 42%. So we see this very strong growth, which is benefiting companies like TRC, which is really a leader in remanufactured sucker rods. But also keep in mind, oil companies have a lot of company property that they use as well. And so we track all of this. It's also important to keep in mind, particularly in the Permian Basin and even in the Bakken to some degree, we are seeing a little bit of growth with continuous sucker rods and steel rods. Companies like Lifting Solutions, who has set up base in the Permian and the Bakken, are providing some unique sucker rod designs. But for the most part, the hybrid strings and the conventional steel rods continue to prevail. One new question that we asked in the 22 report was the use of new, used, or redistributed rod lift surface beam pumping units. The old rocking horse that goes up and down. It's really interesting. I remember I told you that all these rod lift conversions were taking place, even during the decline of COVID. But only about 1 in 3 of these surface units are sold new, i.e. purchased from like Weatherford, Liberty Lift, or Lufkin. 2/3 of these units are in-house redistribution of company property of the oil companies. Oil companies have moved wells off of rod lift to ESP during this elevated oil prices, a lot of used units and such. A lot of the new units, however, that are being sold are the large units, or the XL size units, say 912s and larger. And then also keep in mind that even though the preponderance of wells drilled in United States land are unconventional, we still have about 4% of the drilling rigs drilling conventional wells. So keep that in mind too. So that's kind of comprising all of that. The mean time between failure for electric submersible pumps continues to improve. If you go back to 2019, over half of the users of ESPs would experience failures within a year. That's down to 42%. So ESP mean time between failure did improve 7% from 21 to 22. And we track the mean time between failures by region and basin, both internationally and offshore. Also keep in mind that the use of leasing has been pretty high, particularly in the Permian Basin, for downhole pumps and motors and even for surface equipment and cables. But also keep in mind that we find that oil and gas operators who purchase their ESPs rather than lease their ESPs are generally seeing anywhere between a 20% improved mean time between failure run life on average in U.S. land and 38% improved run life in the Permian. As a consequence, we see more and more U.S. land operators choosing to purchase their ESP equipment versus leasing their ESP equipment. The use of permanent magnetic motors, albeit remains low, interest levels fairly high at about half of the operators interested in learning more about permanent magnetic motors. And so we'll continue to monitor the adoption rate for permanent magnetic motors as well. When we dive into the competitive landscape for suppliers, regardless if we're collecting your feedback on sucker rods, downhole pumps, surface units, ESPs, or gas lift systems, we'll ask you, the oil and gas operators, which suppliers are you using? In this slide, you find that there are 19 different sucker rod suppliers cited as being used in North America land. So as an oil and gas operator, you have many choices to go to buy many of your products and services. When we ask you to rate the performance of the suppliers with whom you use on a scale of 1 to 10, based on and the Net Promoter Score, willingness to recommend them for future use, what we find when we track with these 100,000 plus performance ratings that we have is that not all oil field service company suppliers are viewed as performing at the same level based on the customer reviews. So you can see that we update this survey every year since 2016. And you can see, like for responsiveness to needs in North America land for sucker rods, the industry average rating, this dashed line, inflected down from 21 to 22. For responsiveness to needs, reflected down for equipment quality, reflected down for field service, and reflected down for technical support. This is a classic trend of what happens when you drill 40% more wells in a singular year. And we've got supply chain constraints, we've got constraints on labor, training, competency of people, and material. And so the overall performance levels as a category went down. Now, when we also look for suppliers, like take a look at TRC, their customer review ratings are consistently higher than industry average every year, whereas Weatherford's customer review ratings and Tenaris's customer review ratings are consistently coming in below industry average. So as an oil and gas operator, if you're trying to find best value and you think all suppliers are performing at the same level, based on the voice of your peers in the industry, we see no evidence to suggest that oil field service companies are in fact performing at the same level. Some oil field service companies are viewed as performing better than others, and some are performing on par with industry norm. We see this with sucker rods. We see it with gas lift. We see it with ESPs. Everywhere we go, we see differentiated performance. And so when you translate this into the competitive landscape for sucker rods, what we find is in North America land, TRC, who really specializes in remanufactured inspected sucker rods, is viewed as delivering the best overall value, and market share leader Champion X is viewed as delivering a solid value as well. Some new entrants into the market, Liberty Lift and Lufkin, are coming in and are viewed as delivering very similar pricing strategies and pricing levels is Weatherford ChampionX, but better overall performance. Weatherford's performance based on customer reviews is below industry average and has been trending below industry average for the last several years, resulting in a loss of market share. However, when you move to the international market, you see that Weatherford's performance and competitive position strengthens considerably, and you'll see a trend for Weatherford, that Weatherford's overall rod lift performance internationally is viewed more favorably in the eyes of the customers than it is in North America. And so being able to recognize each oilfield service company's areas of strength and weakness is kind of important for an oil company to be able to identify best value for their operations and their shareholders. You also see internationally that ChampionX and Tenaris are also viewed as performing very solidly and also delivering good value. When you move to downhole pumps for North America land, you see that the market share leader or leaders, ChampionX and Donan, who is now part of Lufkin, are both viewed to kind of going toe-to-toe and delivering pretty solid value. You find that Q2, I guess that's Quinn Pump 2, is also viewed in a very value advantage position, and Liberty Lift has entered into downhole pumps with elite pumps starting up in the Bakken, and they're also viewed as delivering very strong value. And there's a host of other small independent suppliers that we just kind of group together as all others that are viewed in aggregate as delivering best overall value. You also see Weatherford underperforming for downhole pumps, somewhat consistent with what we saw with sucker rods. When you move international, though, again, you see Weatherford's performance improve and competitive position improve to be more of a premium-based supplier in a good position. You see Lufkin and Donan in a value advantage position, and you see market share leader ChampionX in a very solid position right in the middle of the fair value fairway. But you're beginning to see some differentiated performance. Pay more, get more for Weatherford and ChampionX. Pay less and get less internationally with these little small independent regional providers internationally. And so even though everyone's delivering a fair value, you as an operator need to determine, is it okay to pay less and get less, and what's that less that you're receiving? And if I pay more and get more, do I need that extra more, right? So as long as you're choosing suppliers in the fair value fairway, you're getting good value for your investment. When you look at surface units, that market's consolidated quite a bit in the North America land market. Recall I said only 1 in 3 surface units are sold new. 2/3 come from infield redistribution or used. But of the 1/3 that are sold new principally, you're either going to buy them from Lufkin, Weatherford, or from Liberty Lift. And we consistently see this trend for the last several years, where Lufkin with the brand has a brand image of very high quality products and a large installed base, having been in business for 100+ years. Liberty Lift is viewed as the value advantaged provider and has really grown significantly in the last 4 or 5 years in this space. And of course, Weatherford has a very large installed base as well. But as I mentioned earlier, and for rod lift systems, Weatherford's performance in North America land, based on customer reviews, is consistently viewed as underperforming for sucker rods, pumps, and units. But again, when you move into the international market, Weatherford's performance based on customer reviews and competitive position strengthens quite significantly. Lufkin's also viewed very favorably. Schlumberger, who sold their business in North America land to Lufkin, retains their business internationally, but their value proposition is being challenged internationally, and you see these small to mid-tier suppliers down here in the discount quadrant. Moving on to electric submersible pumps, or ESPs, in North America land, what we find is that Halliburton and Baker Hughes are the market share leaders, and they're really kind of been converging in overall performance and competitive position to look closer and closer together to where they're less discernible. Halliburton historically was over here in this top right-hand quadrant, and from 2018 to 22 has been kind of converging and trending towards industry norm performance. Baker Hughes, for the most part, competitive position and performance reviews based on customer reviews has tended to kind of trail or lag the industry average, which has allowed Halliburton some of the ASP to grow. But some of the changes in the market that we see is that ChampionX's performance and competitive position, principally in the Permian Basin where they focus, has improved as they do pump and motor design improvements. Schlumberger's ESP performance has improved, and they're in this premium quadrant, cost more but worth it. Valiant has always been able to be viewed as a value advantage supplier, but they're not really large in scope. But the customers that they do serve always rate them very favorably and see strong value. And Endurance also was viewed as value advantaged. And so when you do your due diligence as an oil and gas operator and you begin to look at oil field service companies' performance by basin, you will start to see situations where some oil field service companies will be rated better based on customer reviews in some basins than other basins. Like you see Halliburton rate very strongly and very favorably in the mid-continent. When you move internationally, the market tightens up quite a bit between Schlumberger and Baker Hughes controlling about 2/3 of the market. You see Halliburton expanding into the international market. Al Kharif has a pretty significant presence in growing in the Middle East. You see Novamet and Barretts. When you move internationally, when you move offshore, Schlumberger and Baker Hughes have about close to 90% market share. And you can see that they're both viewed favorably. Schlumberger is viewed as the premium-based supplier, pay more, get more. Baker Hughes, pay less, get less. And so even though Schlumberger's performance is edging out Baker Hughes in the offshore market, they're both viewed as delivering good values based on the customer reviews that we're receiving from the oil and gas operators that we survey. This is just a quick overview looking at Baker Hughes' U.S. land ESP performance, how they've been kind of struggling to kind of get back moving in towards the fair value fairway. You see that their net promoter score has tended to lag industry average, which has resulted in a decline in market share. Whereas if you take a look at Halliburton's net promoter score was traditionally better than industry average, but has since converged to industry average, which also correlates to their overall performance ratings on technical support, field service, converging from better than industry average to industry average. Champion X has improved recently. We talked about that. Endurance, value advantaged, and Valiant, value advantaged. Moving to gas lift, what we find is that in U.S. land market, Flowco and Priority are the market share leaders and are also viewed as the performance and value advantage leaders, followed by Champion X and Mako. Endurance is in the fair value fairway. Weatherford's customer reviews continue to come in a little bit below industry average, and Liberty's performance reviews declined a little bit in the 22 report. If you combine Liberty's customer reviews for 21 plus 22 and 20, Liberty Lift would plot down here in the fair value fairway. So we do see a little bit of movement from year to year in some of the operators, and sometimes it's good to kind of take maybe a longer time frame, since some of these service companies are relatively small and have few customers, but growing. We can also break this out regionally, be it the Permian Basin or Mid-Con, and when you do that, you see Weatherford's performance and competitive position strengthen here in the Permian and the Mid-Con, for example. So a good example of where you do want to do your due diligence to understand how different oil field service companies will have strengths in some areas more so than others. Moving the plunger lift, Champion X is clearly the market share leader. They're also a good performer, good solid value. Flowco is challenging them, and Epic is right on their heels. So very tight market in the plunger lift market. When you move to progressing cavity pumps, what we find is that for drive heads, we find that Weatherford's well positioned along with Champion X. Schlumberger Kudo is exhibiting some competitive vulnerabilities along with Lufkin versus the broader market in the North America land market. When you move international, you see differentiated value. Pay more, get more, pay less, get less. And you can see everyone's pretty well in the fair value fairway, be it PCM and Weatherford. And when you go to rod strings, you see the lifting solutions based out of Canada, how they have a very significant presence for progressing cavity pump rod strings. You see that Schlumberger, Kudo, and Weatherford have very strong performance and competitive position profiles in the premium quadrant. So you see differentiated value, pay more, get more, pay less, get less, but everyone's in the fair value fairway. When you go internationally for rod strings, you see Weatherford viewed as a value advantaged, followed by Tenaris, Champion X as a discount provider. When you look at PCP downhole pumps, you see a really tightening up of the competitive landscape between Schlumberger, Weatherford, Lifting Solutions, and Mantle and others. When you go internationally for downhole pumps, you do start to see a little bit of separation with PCM and Champion X being viewed as some of the leading performers internationally, with Netch being viewed as a discount provider, but Weatherford solidly in the fair value fairway. But again, now Schlumberger Kudu is exhibiting some competitive vulnerabilities. So if you kind of step back and you look at the artificial lift systems all combined, what you tend to find is, Schlumberger, Baker, Weatherford, a lot of the integrateds, and then you see Champion X. And so Champion X is developing a kind of a competitive advantage over some of the major integrateds. But, there's over 100 different artificial lift suppliers cited as being used globally. And so these 100 plus suppliers that we call all others are really kind of in a value advantage position overall, along with Champion X. Champion X's customer loyalty ratings, as measured by the Net Promoter Score, continue to trend higher than industry average, along with all the 100 plus others all mashed together, if you will. Moving into production chemicals really quick, and then I'd like to kind of wrap it up. Again, we see quite a bit of variability in performance amongst the various suppliers for production chemicals. Some suppliers, like JChem Catalyst, continue to post customer review ratings that are higher than industry average, for example. You can see Halliburton here. Their performance review ratings for product quality have been improving and have now actually crossed the industry average. But similar to what we saw with suckerides and artificial lift, you see the inflection down of the industry average performance curve, again indicating that drilling all these wells really put a strain on the oilfield service providers' capabilities to maintain service levels in the eyes of the oil companies. All the performance ratings from 21 to 22 on the industry average curve declined. Certainly JChem ran counter to the curve, but I'm looking at the industry trends here. When you move to North America land, what we find here is JChem Catalyst is viewed as the most value advantaged and growing. Champion X has been moving into more of the premium quadrant, costs more of it worth it. Baker Hughes is a premium-based supplier, but would benefit from improving service and support levels. Their product quality and their chemistry and technology rates very favorably. Usually Baker Hughes' ratings that fall below industry average that drive them to the left-hand side are principally service and support. And then there's a whole host of other small to medium-sized providers over here, from Project Chemical to a whole host of others that collectively kind of plot out as more of a discount provider. This is an example of what happens when you broaden it up to a whole host of the smaller suppliers, and you can see kind of a dichotomy of how the small to medium-sized chemical providers are down here in this value advantage. But we're going to talk more about this in just a moment. We see differences regionally as well. When you move internationally, you see Baker Hughes and Champion X really dominating the market in terms of performance and market share, and the same thing when you move internationally. Now, one of the things I'd like to bring to your attention, particularly those of you in United States land, is we find a very strong correlation between the root causes between artificial lift and the ineffectiveness of production chemicals. In fact, when we ask the oil and gas operators what broke on your artificial lift system and what do you attribute to be the root cause, oftentimes the root causes that are mentioned are things like corrosion and scale and paraffin and things of that nature, indicating that, hey, look, we know you use production chemicals, but the problem that you have here is that the effectiveness of all of these production chemicals are not necessarily high. When you move into like the United States land, for every one person that says their production chemical programs are very effective and give it a 9 or a 10 on rating effectiveness, if you take a look at the people that rated a 7 or lower, you've got more people that are questioning the efficacy of their production chemical program than as to its effectiveness than saying that it works. And so this really creates an interlinkage, if you will, as an oil and gas operator. If you've got wells with a hot oiler truck is having to come out every 90 days, it's a good opportunity to try to better integrate your production chemical delivery system, your chemistry, your pumps, your monitoring, along with your artificial lift system to optimize the performance of that well. This business model is not for everybody, and not all oil companies are looking for a collaborative-based approach to come up with a production solution. However, for those oil and gas operators that are interested in a collaborative-based approach, what we see at Kimberlite as the future business model as we digitize the oil field a little bit is that production chemicals either can help or hurt the situation and can harm and help contribute to artificial lift failures. And as you start to have more downhole monitoring and emissions monitoring, companies like ChampionX with XBOC or Weatherford with Foresight, Emerson with ZI, and others that have the SCADA systems that can help plug all this together and build some algorithms to help you as an operator begin to identify on a predictive basis how to enhance on your oil recovery. This is something that we think applies to certain situations, certain wells, and certain operators. Any operators that would like to learn more about what we're seeing on these trends, please feel free to reach out. This just kind of shows, ChampionX in the Permian Basin, for example, how, they're pretty well positioned in lift and chemicals and would be one of those suppliers that are positioned to kind of help put together a collaborative-based approach, for example. They're usually pretty well positioned in terms of performance. Weatherford has a lot of the tools. Sometimes the performance levels are not as high, but in many cases they too will have some tools for a collaborative-based approach as well for consideration. We do find too, and I'll wrap it up with this, that not all products and segments are price driven. What we find in North America land for chemicals, for example, service levels and production chemical performance levels are a big driver in recommendation for a chemical provider, more so than price. When you move in the international market, you see service and performance, and even when you move offshore, you start to see price sensitivity begin to increase. And so I know many times everyone says, hey, the lowest price is the way to go. I've just showed you that not all providers perform at the same level, so if you go with lowest price, you're not always going to get best value. What we typically find when we talk to the oil and gas operators is that in their recommendation to recommend use of a supplier, we almost always find segmentation. For some oil and gas operators will lean on price more and be a little bit more commodity procurement driven. Others will tend to value service more. Some will value and tend to value performance more. So I think with that, we'll probably just wrap it up here with a quick look and thoughts about the end of 22. Certainly the elections are around the corner. Due to the bad policy and the war in Ukraine, we've seen some really dramatic energy scarcity and energy security concerns. Lots of volatility in the market, a lot of artificially inflated things taking place. So in U.S. land, we see rig counts kind of leveling out between now and the end of the year. Most operators need to hang on to their high-spec rigs before they don't want to turn them in, because we're going to be drilling more wells in 23 versus 22. International and offshore will continue to plod along in double-digit growth rates due to the underinvestment in our industry over the last 7 years. As you all know, oil and gas demand is not slowing down. It will continue to grow at about 1 million to 1.4 million barrels a year over the next 10, 20 years. And so we're going to have to get to 110, 120 million barrels a day of production over the next 2 decades. Energy transition will not happen overnight. But we do see just an incredible amount of innovation and hard work on behalf of the oil field service providers and the oil companies, making the impossible possible and delivering the energy that's needed. Unfortunately for Europe, they made several bad decisions over the last several years, and here they are going to be potentially having to shut down manufacturing, exacerbating recessionary pressures, and having people pay exorbitant rates for heat, and in many cases out. So it's really sad to see the effects of bad policy, but I'm really proud to be part of this energy industry, very proud that you're part of it, and thank you for attending this webinar. I know this webinar went a little bit longer than normal, but please feel free to reach out to Kimberlite if you have any questions on any oil field products and services that we research. If you'd like to be part of our future research, let us know. And for that, we'll sign off, and thank you very much. Bye now.